This is my audience. Good evening. Every year, on a specific month, on the 10th day of the first month of the Islamic calendar, thousands of men and boys flock to the streets, armed with knives, armed with daggers, and chained with razor blades on the end of them, with the goal of attacking themselves. In the 7th century, Islam was still a relatively new religion. They were trying to decide how they were going to deal with the transference of power from their supreme leader, the caliph, to the next one. There was a tribe, or a branch of the religion, who thought that that transference of power should occur from father to son. There was another branch who thought that it should be appointed, that Allah should come down and direct who should be the next leader. The second caliph, who was the second supreme leader of Islam, was determined to abide by the Islamic principles of allowing the next caliph to be appointed. However, on his deathbed, he decided that he would bestow that responsibility and that power upon his son, who was named Yazid. This caused a great rift in the Islamic community. There were the Sunnis, who believed that that transfers of power should be based off of a bloodline, and there were the Shiites, who felt as though there should be a direct heir of Muhammad and an appointed leader that received that title. Now, the Sunnis and the Shiites to this day have been fighting one another, and it's all based off of what happened in the 7th century. So the second caliph decided that his son, the third caliph, Yazid, would gain the power, and the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad was, at the time, the figurehead of the Islamic community. He was the one who was highly revered and highly respected. Yazid was not so much. Yazid came to the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. His name was Imam Hussein, and he asked him for his support in a public forum so that he could sway the people of the Islamic community. However, Imam Hussein decided not to give him that support, and instead, he decided to seek refuge in Mecca. So he took his 70-some family members, and he just started to trek to Mecca. On that trek, he was intercepted by an army of 30,000 soldiers sent by the Caliph Yazid, who, after 3.5 days of depriving them of water, slaughtered them. They beheaded all the men and boys, and they sent the women to prison in Syria. Obviously, this sort of an infraction would not be taken lightly by the people of Islam, especially because there was already that rift that was between the Sunnis and the Shiites. This further cemented that disagreement. The Sunnis comprised about 85% of the Islamic community. The Shiites are about 15%. But at that time, the numbers were slightly more skewed and slightly more balanced. That day where the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Imam Hussein, was slaughtered is remembered by the Shiite Muslims on the day of Ashura, the 10th day of the first month of the Islamic calendar. That month is called the month of Muharram, which is one of 4 sacred calendars, or one of 4 sacred months that the Islamic community has. On this day, the Sunnis view it as a day of atonement, a day of fasting, a day of prayer, because that was also the day that the Egyptians freed the Israelites from slavery, and that Moses was granted passage through the Red Sea when the seas were parted. They view it that Allah parted the seas. The Shiites, however, remember that day as one of remembering the sacrifice that Imam Hussein took. So they take to the streets, they're armed to the teeth, and they cut themselves. They look at it as an act of a prideful event. You're trying to get the bloodiest as you can because you're trying to symbolize the pain that Imam Hussein dealt with. Additionally, while this is going on the day of remembrance, there's also an area in southern Iran where before dawn, people get up and they cover themselves completely in mud, and then they walk around bonfires until the mud gets caked on them, and they beat themselves and they say prayers, and that's also, again, to remember the sacrifice that Imam Hussein made. They feel as though that his remembrances and his body is within the soil, and that they can obtain some wisdom and some of his divine guidance by doing that. Now, the leaders in the Islamic community are somewhat torn on whether or not they support these sort of actions. Some feel, the modernists feel as though that those efforts could be better served by donating blood or by peaceful protesting. They feel as though cutting yourselves and doing harm to yourselves is against the policies and the doctrine of Islam. However, the traditional clerics feel as though that is perfectly acceptable. And in fact, it's a practice called tatbir, where the self-flagellation, the self-mutilation, and the cutting of the forehead is perfectly acceptable because you're showing how much you care for the religion. Why do we care about this today? Islam has 1.6 billion followers throughout the world. They're the second largest religion behind Christianity, and they're also the fastest growing religion. As modern day believers of whatever religion, it's essential that we have a basic understanding, at least, about what drives Islam, what drives these practices, and that we can have a hearty appreciation of the level of devotion to which they have, that they're willing to go to these lengths to harm themselves in order to appease their beliefs and their doctrines. So, October 11th this year, on the day of Akbar, when we turn on our computers or our TVs to CNN, Fox News, and we see thousands of men throughout the world cutting themselves and boys with razor blades attacking themselves, it's important that we at least have an understanding of why they're doing that, because this happens in the United Kingdom, this happens in Greece, this doesn't happen that far away. It's not that long until this is happening in our own backyards, and it's important that we have an understanding of why they're doing that.